Springboks won handsomely against Georgia. The first month of Springbok tests is over, and phase one, we now move into the Rugby Championship. And with me again, as per normal, Nick Mallett and Gavin Rich. Guys, welcome. Nick, maybe start with you. Just your thoughts on Saturday's test.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think it had a couple of lessons for everyone, really, and that is that that teams are pretty good at facing physicality. They, up to number probably 10, 11, 12 in the world, that if you batter away at the front door, they're pretty aware of how you've got to stop. You know, they double tackle, they tend to mess your breakdown up, to slow your ball down. They know you're not going to do a tip-off pass or behind the back. So there's a lot of physicality, and I thought that, I mean, the Georgians are well known for their physicality. I thought their loose trio were outstanding. I thought that their lineout was good, and they got straight into our faces. So it was a well worthwhile sort of hit out, if you like, at how we can actually adapt our game against a side that is stopping us, maybe on the gain line, and the ability then to move it and to create more space on the outside for our back three and our outside centre. And I thought that they managed to do it. We made a lot of handling errors, but we were the effort was there, the intention was there, and I think the final 10 minutes, we obviously got a payback time. We managed to score 20-odd points in those last 10 minutes. So probably not all that good in the first half, and questions around how we were going to try and break them down, and then I think it finished nicely for us.
Gav, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with Nick. I'd say that what I really enjoyed about that game was how, in fact, the two games on Saturday, because I also watched obviously the South African under-20 side. And what's coming through in South African rugby now is that sort of blend between sort of brutality and the physical forward play and what's happening at the back and the skill levels. I mean, that South African under-20 side, I mean, was just absolutely fantastic the way they bossed it was the old South African style of bossing the scrums and driving really strongly and being brutally physical at the collision points. But, what's also developing in the South African game, and it started, I think, not just when Tony Brown arrived, it started actually, I think that the switch started happening, and I think Nick might agree with me, is when we played France and Marseille in 2022, and we started to run the ball back at the French to surprise them. And we got a bit of profit out of that. And it was a game, if you remember, that Peter Steph du Toit was red carded after about 5 minutes. We were down to 14 men. Eventually, we lost to France by about 1 point. I think there was a switch in South African, like almost a switch in the South African, the Springbok mentality after that. A week later, we had Manie Lebok join the team when they played against Italy. He played in the second half. And ever since then, there has been that change. We wouldn't have won that 2023 quarterfinal against France if it wasn't for what Manie did in the first half of that game. And then Pollard came on and closed it out with his clutch kicking. And I think like what I really enjoyed about Saturday was, as Nick says, the last 10, 20 minutes, the skills that suddenly came through. But one thing, and I see that Rassie has touched on it, if you keep changing your team, obviously there are going to be mistakes. I'm a great believer in continuity. I felt that John Dobson made a mistake by not choosing his top team for his last league game in the URC. And that, I thought, tripped him up when they played Glasgow in the quarterfinal. And just, Rassie has chopped and changed. We know why he's doing it. We saw the All Blacks on Saturday playing a changed-up team against France, and suddenly they weren't nearly as good as the week before. Yeah. So, I think you've got to sort of put that in and look at that when you assess this phase of the South African season as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit, I thought the concerning thing for me was there was a lot of mistakes and a lot of handling errors. But as Nick, you say, the effort was there. And when you're getting so much ball on the front foot, like we got on Saturday, you're going to try things. And I can see it later in the season, by the time we get to Auckland, probably being a lot better after another month of the training, etc. I think some guys stood out for me in that game as well. I think Ron Lokia had an exceptional game. He's really grown as a Springbok, matured as a test option for Rassie. Grant Williams again. I mean, he made 2 tries with these little breaks. Really good. And I think there's other guys coming through that we would expect the first choice guys to be there for the New Zealand game, but Rusty's got other options now, like Grant, like Ruan, those type of guys, and I think that was very satisfying.
No, it was, and what I really liked, I mean, Ruan is a very good example, is that I mean, he's had leadership from quite a young age, and then he got his opportunity last year when we had a whole spate of injuries to our locks, and he took his opportunity really well. In this game, I mean, he's got a work rate that is Peter Steff, the toy-like at lock. And also like Mostert, you know, it's quite nice having those type of locks who who generate so much in the carry, in tackles, in offloads, in hitting rucks. They're good at the line-out. They call the line-outs well. So we've got a really nice a nice balance at lock at the moment, with Lutiaga coming back as well, and Echis Snyman and Etzebeth. We've got a number, and we're very fortunate. Scrum half situation, I agree. I think, you want to wrap him up and keep him and only roll him out for the top games, because you don't want him to get injured. Grant Williams now has managed to increase the accuracy of his core skills. So his box kicking, his decisions when to kick, the speed of pass off the base of the scrum. He's getting to the breakdown really quickly, almost New Zealand like, in the way that he's the second arrival all the time. It's only when he maybe gets caught up in a tackle that he can't do it. But he gives us that extra yard, and he's such a threat around the fringes. You can't take your eyes off him. So very true. I'd add that to that Keenan Moody, who had a huge work rate in that game. And he had a couple of things he did right. I thought that chip of his was poor. Hold on to the ball when you go, going forward, try and offload out of the contact or else. But to kick a ball away, I didn't think was a good idea. He had one knock on where his head came up. But they're small things, because he's made such progress in terms of the other. I really like him at outside centre, and I think that's going to be his role going into the future. We've got such good wingers that even though he's very good in the air, I think at outside centre he's got the physicality, the size, the intelligence, and on defence. I remember him against Ione in the game in the build-up to the World Cup in 2023, when we put 35 points on him, and he was playing as a 20-year-old or whatever he was at that time. It was quite extraordinary the way he handled his first test at outside centre. So we're building up strength in depth, but I still agree with you, Brendan. I think that the older guys, if I had to go through, say, the Kriel, Jesse Kriel, Damian Dallander, I think Colby, I think that Damian Willems is getting back into it. You've got Pollard as well. They haven't played themselves out of the mix. Those guys are still going to be there for the Australian test, definitely. And whereas there might be maybe question marks around Bongi, maybe question marks around the front row situation. Koch, is he going to hold off the challenge of Neetling Fushi? I'm not so sure. But and in the other positions, loose forward, we've got plenty. So it's going to be a very interesting who he lays out. Now this we're cutting to 36. I mean, it's going to be tough on those 9 guys, or whatever it is, 36 to 45, whatever he's going to cut out, 9 or 10 players, because they've all contributed and they've all grown in experience. So it's been a very good month of test match rugby for the BOKS.
Brendan, I'm a bit confused, because you told me last week that Rassie had said at a press conference. I didn't really follow the press conferences last week. That Rassie had said at a press conference that he was. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just saw you jumping around there. I thought maybe you're trying to adjust.
I've got some glare in my face. I'm just moving up.
Okay. You told me that Rassie had said last week that he was going to go with the young guys against Australia. And then in the post-match press conference, it felt like he had adjusted. I don't know whether it was because he saw Australia play the last 30 minutes against the Lions. I don't know. But he appeared to adjust it and say, well, I'm going to go with the experienced guys with a few experimental changes here and there. Because we do need to go. I mean, what I said just now about the continuity. I mean, we've got to have some kind of continuity before we go into the New Zealand test. We can't keep making 10 changes a game in the Australian series. So I am hoping that at the very least we get to see the second string, the full strength team play in the second game, which will be the one in Cape Town, immediately before we go to New Zealand.
Yeah, what I meant by that, what he said in that press conference was it'd probably be more of a mix and match team, which pretty much like he probably played against Australia last year. That's the sense I got out of it, that you'd have maybe a Jan-Hendrik Wessels and a Kainan Moody. Those type of players would be in between, but the core of the group would probably be still very experienced. And he did say he wants to rest some senior players. So he didn't give a number, but that. And then the other thing is, was also, it's probably going to be more than the 9 guys cut anyway, because you've got Lucanio Am, who's coming back for the Rugby Champs. Now, whether that's for these first games or for New Zealand, he hasn't specified. But Gerard Steenekam's coming back. Apparently, Ben Jason Dixon's going to be ready. Jean Klein might be ready, depending on his knee. Jean-Luc du Preez is coming back. He's the one player he did say would be back for the Australia games. And then what happens to a guy like Jean Augustus as well? I mean, is his injury long-term? We don't know. So we'll probably get more information on that. So if all those guys come back as well, it'll probably be more than 9 guys that sort of drop out. But still, I think there's so much experience there. I'd probably still see, as I say, like a Jan-Hendrik Wessels is a very good example. Somebody like that still staying in the group and probably playing. But the core, I think, would still be very much, you might get an Ed Wolf and a Mava playing against instead of a Kurt Lee or Cheslin, that sort of thing. But the core of it will still be experienced.
Okay, well, that's good, because as I say, I think the continuity is important. And if I was selecting the team, that you mentioned a lot of those guys coming back, they have to get fit again, obviously. So I would imagine that given the importance of the All Black games, we might see, like if we're going to see a John Klein, for instance, or Jano Augustus, we might see them against Argentina after we played against New Zealand.
What I think we mustn't lose sight of is that there is no A-BOK team. Everyone who says there isn't an A-BOK team. I think Rassie reckons that he'll only put out that A-BOK team, or the team that's best in form in a semi-final or a final, or perhaps in the Eden Park test, or perhaps against France in France. There are going to be certain situations where he's going to say, right, I'm putting the best players in form to play this test match. It doesn't necessarily have to be that this is my primary selected Springbok side. He's developed such a lot of strength in depth that you could argue, that if you start with Jan-Hendrik Wessels and bring Marks off the bench, that's as strong as you can get. If you start Marks, bring Wessels off the bench, who knows which is better? If you start Rio Nokia instead of Lotiaga, there's so many situations that I wouldn't be at all bothered if a number of players was in the starting lineup for the game against the New Zealanders in Eden Park. I think that he's going to build up towards that. So that is going to be the first time. But as I said, I think it's going to be the form BOK team at that moment. And if that includes, a surprise on the bench, like it is to Hazen as a flank come centre, well, so be it,
Yeah, and I mean, there's also a guy like Marco van Staden also put it. I know Rassie said last week he was the internal man of the match the week before against Italy as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of those guys who wouldn't necessarily be, they might not have the experience of some of the older guys, but it wouldn't necessarily be a step back by playing any of them anyway. I want to ask you guys both, what did you think of Cobus Wiese at 8? Obviously, I think Rassie's probably thinking more of a bench role for him, that he can cover a couple of positions off the bench there. But I just get you guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, if I can come in here, Gavin, I think number 8, you should have good skills. You should really have good handling skills, passing skills, line-out skills. You should understand lines of running. Where to go off a line-out, where to go off the back of a scrum to get into position as quickly as possible. It's not necessarily the pace you've got; it's the anticipation of knowing where to go that's very important in that position. So, I mean, he hasn't played. He might have played a bit there, but he hasn't played enough, and he made enough, errors on Saturday for me to think that'd be difficult. Him going into a test match, he needs a couple more games in that position to be comfortable. And then again, we mustn't avoid the discussion about Sia, because Sia got a hell of a whack at the beginning of the game, went off and had to, was bounced by that Georgian was here flanker, or number 8 he might have been, and he came back, and I thought he was trying, but he needs game time. He needs to play to get back to the form that he needs to have to captain the Springboks at Eden Park. So a guy like him who didn't play the first 3 games of the season, I think it's really important for him to get into form and to play in a position to justify his selection as captain in going forward for the New Zealand games and also the games at the end of the season.
Brendan, on Cobus Wiese, I've always seen his alternative position to lock being number 7. In fact, blindside is where he played most of his games for the Stormers, so maybe that's why I think of him as that. And it was only later in his career at Stormers that he started to play at number 4 a couple of occasions, and I thought, jeepers, that guy can actually play there. He reminded me of another Cobus Wiese whose name began with a K and not a C. So I see him as a lock come flank. I don't see him as a lock come number 8. I think that Rassie just wants to see what the potential is there. Yeah. Just talking about Nick was talking about forwards with ball skills and so forth and needing it, and just a shout out again because I just think he's possibly one of the best rugby players in the world now, and I'm talking about Salmaan. Just what he can do for a big guy is just phenomenal. And some of those little sort of offloads out of the back of his hand, and I don't know whether it was working with John Mitchell at a very early stage of his career, but he's got phenomenal skill levels. You talk about when you say the best rugby player, I often sort of say somebody like Beauden Barrett to me might be the best rugby player in the world, but he's not my best fly half, if you know what I mean. There are players like that. There are players that you just say, that guy's a good player, and it doesn't matter where he plays, he's just phenomenal. And I just think that Salmaan is fantastic. I mean, he's just such a good rugby player.
He is. He was a very good cricketer, apparently. Really batted number 4 and played Nuffield week. I'm not sure. I heard he was at us, because often that goes hand in hand with your ball skills, with your hand-eye coordination. And, not just in test matches, but you see him time and time again for Leinster, as well as when he was playing for Munster. These octopus arms that come out, and manage to get them offload going. He was one of the highest offloading numbers in the URC last season. And it's devastating when they come off, because if you're able to pass out of contact on the front foot, and we don't have to have a ruck. Everyone says it, talks about the speed of the ruck, but nothing's quicker than a pass straight into the breadbasket of the guy supporting you. So the big thing there is there is a high error rate. So you've got to keep doing it and keep doing it. What I really like about the New Zealanders is they say, it starts off as a 30-70, 30% success, 70% failure. Then the better you get at it, it's a 50-50. And then eventually that same situation will be a 70% success rate and only 30%. And when you're at that, then you've got to do it, because then you're going to be creating those try-scoring opportunities. And he does. I mean, it was wonderful. I love that one. Well, I think the try of the game was the one which went through. I think Norkia made the final pass. Just brilliant. That came out of I think he was the initiator of that break.
Just when you mentioned ball skills, when you mentioned ball skills, Nick, it cued me, made me think of Sacha, because I was speaking to Christian Stewart, funnily enough, a couple of days ago, and Chris said to me, he said that Sacha's like so phenomenally talented that he said he wishes he played tennis. He said he'd probably win Wimbledon, because he has got those great sort of individual skills. What did you think of? What do you guys think of Sacha at the weekend?
Yeah, I thought he played a typically Sacha game. He's very, very difficult to pin down, because he sidesteps and he's got great pace and he can weave in and out of the traffic. But his goal kicking wasn't nearly as good as one would have expected, because that's been a strong point of his over Manie Libbok. His distribution wasn't as good as Manie's was the week before. And so I know he had a hip pointer apparently in the lead up, so and ran it off and played, but he's still got work to do. He's really got. I mean, he's not the finished product by any means at 10. He's a work in progress that I think will get better and better, providing he listens, providing he understands the role. You've got to you've got to, and I'm so pleased Tony Brown's there. You've got someone there who can say, listen, this is the key part of this role is to make other people look good. The fact that you make yourself look good once or twice a game, that's fine, but make sure that everyone else is looking good around you. Forwards, your inside centers, your outside, your back three, make absolutely certain you do not make errors. So error-free performance by a 10 is invaluable. It's no good having a guy who can create 3 opportunities, but he drops, he kicks it out on the full 3 times and misses 3 tackles. You've got to weigh up your positives and your negatives, and I think he's got to lower his negatives at the moment.
Yeah, Gav, I'll just go back to what Rusty said a couple of weeks ago, where he said Sacha sometimes needs to realize he doesn't have to create all the magic at times. Sometimes there's enough other players on the other side of him that can probably take that. And I think he's so used to, and obviously got the confidence, that he does that at times. I've sort of put down the weekend's kicking performance to the hip injury. I'm not sure how bad it was, but it sounded like he had to do a fitness test just before kickoff, and that may have influenced him. The other thing with him, though, I mean, just dealing with him, and you've probably dealt with him more, Gav, but the little bit I've dealt with him and interviewed him, you get those players every now and again. Bob Skinstad was one. Nick, you worked a lot with him. They just seem like on another level to every other rugby player around them. They just seem more savvy. Just the way they listen to questions, the way they talk about rugby, everything. He's got that little bit of extra, and I think just at times he's the type of player you want on the field at all times anyway, because he's got that X factor. So I'm as covering the box for so long. He's the type of player you're going to excuse 1 or 2 mistakes, but he needs to learn. He needs to be on the field. So I'd play him as much as possible in the match day 23 as well, till he get there. But you're right, he has to listen, and I'm sure that's one of the things. I know Russie wasn't very impressed with the injury that he had last year before the All Blacks one that he sort of played with. He's got that type of thing he needs to do, because that's the quickest way of playing yourself out of the team if you don't listen to the coaches.
Just on Sacha, you mentioned his goal kicking on Saturday as if it was an aberration. This season, his goal kicking generally hasn't been as good as it was last season. I mean, for the Stormers, he missed quite a few as well. And remember last year he came in and he sort of bombed those ones over from inside his own half, and you sort of felt, well, he's a guy you can bank on. He's almost like another Pollard, which I'm sure he is. But, he is a guy who had to work on his kicking. I spoke to, for a feature I did for a magazine, I spoke to a schoolboy coach at Bishop's, Wes Chetty, and he tells me that Sacha spent a lot of time working when he wasn't the Bishop's first choice kicker in his standard 9 year. There was a guy who's subsequently gone on to do really well at hockey. And Sacha really had to work on his game. And he spoke about a game that was a turning point in Sacha's career where Bishop scored 5 tries to 2 and lost a game because Sacha missed all his kicks. And he said that this defines Sacha's work ethic. He said he was driving because Wes's wife works at the medical unit or something at Bishop's. So about 2 hours after the game, he was driving back there and he was driving past the field. And this is after the rugby match. He said there was Sacha apparently bombing over kicks and kicking. And then Wes is obviously a runner as well. He'd go running on a Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. And there was Sacha working on his kicking. It's something that he's really worked at. It's not something that he was necessarily, although I've just said, contradicting myself because I just said a little while ago, he's so talented. That is something that he has developed himself, rather than he was like a Nas Botha born with and been like that since under 13.
Yeah. I think if you mentioned Nas Botha, I chatted to him quite a bit at Supersport, and he said he used to, he spent hours practicing. So, and Johnny Wilkinson, you don't become a 90% goal kicker just because we had Diego Dominguez who played with me when I was coaching at Stade Francais. The guy, he practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. It was just so that it was like a really good putter, somewhere at golf. You're not just gifted by being a good putter. It's because you practice and practice and you get a feel for it. And so all good kickers work incredibly hard. And I'm sure Pollard does as well, because he's one of the best. So the fact that he does, that's good news. It's good news that he works really hard. And it's good news that I know Marnie, when he was kicking well for the Stormers, he was putting in a lot of hours. in those first couple of seasons when the Stormers won the final and got to the final. So, and he kicked some absolutely critical kicks for them. So you have to put in the work. It's simple as that. I'm sure Dan Carter kicked it for hours as well. So it's part of the job of playing.
I was going to ask, just to go something a bit different. It's something that comes up quite a lot. Nick's just frozen on my side. Gav, is he on your side, the rock?
Yeah, no, he's also frozen on my side.
Okay, yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
You're back, Nick.
Looks like you're in a museum there for a moment. Yeah, anyway.
No, I just wanted to ask, maybe get your take, Nick, on something else. One of the players that keeps on coming up in sort of messages on Twitter and on the YouTube channel that fans don't seem to understand is Salmaan Moerat. There's a lot of people who question his worth and question why Rassie has faith in him. And I know Gav, him and I talk a lot about John Dobson also having faith in him. He's obviously got very good leadership abilities. But to be captain of the Springboks, I mean, we saw it with John Smith as well. There's a lot of stuff people didn't see always that John Smith did for the Springboks. I just want to get your take on Salmaan, that maybe what Rassie and Dobbo see in it.
Well, I'll talk firstly about his rugby skills. He does the dark arts. He does the hard work. When he plays a really good game for the Stormers, you'll see that he'll have made 15, 16 clean-outs of rucks. He's a Bucky's Boete hitter of rucks. He stops mauls. He generates more power, but he's very, very good at stopping mauls. And his tackling is one of his great strengths. I mean, if he can, it's why he's knocked himself out so many times, because he actually just launches himself, into guys from the waist down, and occasionally gets his head on the wrong side. So he's not a ball carrier. He's not probably your primary jumper in the lineout, but he's the front of the lineout workhorse. And so you've got to look at him in that sense. How many rucks has he cleaned? How many times he got off the line and made that initial tackle, and it's been a positive tackle, knocking the ball carrier backwards. If you look at those stats, then and he can stay on the field, because the other thing is he's been, unfortunately, he's had a lot of injuries in the early part of his career. So if he can get game time, 80 minutes, you'll see the players will see his stats are right up there, just in those aspects that you need from that type of lock. You can't have, two guys like Salmaan playing lock. Who's going to get the ball for you? You've got to get someone getting in there and smashing people back. So he does do that, and I've seen it, and I've gone through the stats with John Dobson, because I also questioned it, because I was also looking and seeing, he doesn't seem to ever carry that much. So that's the first point as a rugby player. Those are his strengths. The second point is he's a remarkable person. He really is. I've been fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with him, and the respect the other players have for him, his understanding of how to handle referees. He's been captain all his life of all the teams he's been involved in, and that includes Paarl Boys High, I think, where he was at Paarl Boys High, and SA under 19, SA under 21. So he's got a really good feel for leadership, and that is something, as I well know, you shouldn't just discard that easily. The Gary Teichmann thing, I've said on numerous occasions that was my biggest mistake. And I know John Smith carried on playing probably for 2 years longer than he probably should have, because of his skills as a leader. You had Bismarck pushing hard to knock that door down, but because all the coaches backed John, he stayed on for a couple more years. So I think you've got to look at Salmaan in that sense. In understand what his job is, and what his work rate and what his stats you have to look at. And then also understand his role as a captain and as a future captain, possibly for the Boks, if he can continue to stay uninjured.
Brendan, as you know, I've defended Salmaan a lot, and I now want to sort of take the tape of what Nick's just said around and play it to people, because I had this argument with people in Port Elizabeth actually on the eve of the game, and they said they never throw him in the line out. I said he's often not used as the captain. He's not there to do that role. I mean, I first noted. I went to I think it was the 2016 Craven Week in Kersney. I didn't go there to work, actually. I was in KZN on a break, and I decided that seeing it's at Kersney, I'll go through, and I went and I watched the Western Province, and there were two players in that tournament that stood out to me as really special players. One of them was Damian Willemse, who at that stage was playing fly half for Western Province schools, and the other one was Salmaan. And actually there were a few others that came through from other provinces as well, but those two in particular. And Salmaan hasn't disappointed me as a player or as Nick says, a leader. I think he was the leader of that Western Province schools side. He's just is a phenomenal player, and as Nick says as well, there's more to him than just what you see on the field. So yeah, I mean, I completely endorse what Nick says.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we're starting to run out of time, so I'm gonna just turn us to the other test matches of the weekend, the All Blacks France one, which was a lot more competitive than we probably expected, but thanks to the changes. And then I suppose the disappointing first 50 minutes from the Wallabies. They finished strong, and I think both teams probably took quite a bit out of that test. But there were a couple of chinks in the Lions' armor in that last half an hour. They didn't look as impressive, and their bench certainly didn't make the impact that they probably would have wanted. Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave this to Gavin, because I was flying from Amsterdam to Umbria in Italy, and I missed that game, and I haven't got it on replay. So I've only read reports on the game, and I don't like commenting on a game that I haven't seen.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Gavin, if you could take it from here.
Well, I was also traveling at the time as it happened, so I didn't watch the game live because I was between Jeffreys Bay and Plettenberg Bay. I wanted to watch the game, but I've struggled to find a place in Jeffreys before I left, and then I decided to get here and get here in time for the French. I mean, but before the Georgia Springboks game. I just think that, having watched the game, and I didn't watch the entire game, so maybe I didn't watch enough of those last 30 minutes. I just think that there was a wide chasm between the two teams, and that the Lions were so much better. And yes, Australia came back towards the end, but I just think from what I saw, there was just, to me, it was almost like what I expected to see. I've always sort of felt that it's going to be a 3-0 series win to the Lions, and there wasn't anything that changed that for me. I mean, it was good for the series that the Aussies came back, but let's be honest, it was 29-12 going into the 79th minute of that game. 27-12 to the Lions, which is an emphatic victory. The Aussies got a late try, and it was a consolation try only because they were never going to win the game. So to me, that's a warning sign for the series, because to me it looks as if there's a good chance that the Lions might get through again this weekend, and then it's going to be 3-0, and that's not good for, that's obviously not good for Australian rugby, and not good for world rugby actually. But that's the way I see it.
Would Will Skelton coming back and Valentini coming back? Would they, in terms of physicality, they must improve the performance of the pack, because those are very, very physical players. They're right up there with the best in the world.
100%. No, I agree. So if they come back, I actually didn't know. I'm not aware if they're coming back or not. But if they come, and look, let's be honest. When we saw I think when we all saw the team, that Wallabies team that had been selected with the youngster at fly half, then even people who were desperately wanting the Wallabies to win would surely have thought to themselves, "This is going to be a really tough one." I mean, so it didn't surprise me when, as I say, I was driving and I was like looking at my phone to see what the score was. It didn't surprise me when at one stage the Lions were 15-0 up, although that try subsequently got chalked off. So if the Aussies can strengthen their team, then definitely it could be a different story this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, just from one, I saw an interview with Ronan Agaro, obviously coaches Will Skelton at La Rochelle, and he was making the point that he'll be good for the Wallabies, but you're not going to get your best game out of him in his first game back, because he's the type of almost like a diesel engine that needs to get a bit. So in the third test, he'll probably be a lot better. But they will make a difference. There's one thing I thought during watching that game was when the Lions got up like that, I thought it's one of those that the next score, if they score again after being 20-odd points up, they would have scored 50. But because they almost took their foot off the gas, and the Wallabies kept on trying, kept on putting phase after phase and getting nothing. And when they got through, it became a different game as well. So I think there's enough there for both sides. So Andy Farrell will probably be livid that they didn't put up 50, because you could see a Wallaby team taking 50 the way they were playing in that first 40, 50 minutes. And then the other thing, which I see has become a bit of an issue in Australia, or in the English press, of course, Clive Woodward fueling the fire there a bit, is the fact right at the end where the Wallabies had the ball and they were attacking, their captain, Harry Wilson, turned around and kicked the ball over the dead ball line to end the game. So there's been a lot of sort of comments like that in the British press as well, saying that if that's a losing mentality. So that should fire up the Wallabies a bit before this weekend.
Yeah, I almost got the impression in that game that the Lions wanted to be aligned with their media, because their media, I got the impression reading the UK media, they desperately want the Lions to be competitive. And I read Stephen Jones's match report, and he's talking about a compelling test, and and I almost like writing up the Lions, which he wouldn't do if they were playing against South Africa or New Zealand. He would, because it is a huge challenge when they come and play here. Sorry, Nick, you were going to say something.
No, I was virtually along the same lines. I was saying it's really sad that Australia, what are they, 9th or 10th in the world? They're right down there. So I know that Joe Schmidt is a good coach. I know how well he prepares teams. He was right at the start of Ireland's turnaround and winning Grand Slams and winning Six Nations Championships. And if he can't manage to get this team to perform, then not many coaches can. So it is a problem of your cattle. You don't have the cattle, you're not a good coach. I mean, you can't make magic out of donkeys, unfortunately. And I'm just hoping that's not the case. I'm really hoping they get a win in the second test. It's almost hope against hope, because you want it to be 1-1 going into the third one. You want there to be a bit of a spice in that last test. 2-0 up, it's just as you say, it's the expectations, what everyone has expected. And going into 2027, you've got to ask yourself, is that going to encourage more youngsters to play rugby, to see their national team getting spanked by the Northern Hemisphere? So from a rugby perspective, I'd really hope that the Australians can produce an outstanding performance this coming Saturday.
Brendan, if I was the Lions, if I was the Wallabies, what I'd be concerned about is that, and the exception was this last series when they came to South Africa, which is a COVID series. So maybe you can't really sort of like use that as a sort of yardstick. But the Lions do tend to get better, and for obvious reasons. They're less prepared for the very first Test match, and maybe even more so on this series where they've played opposition where they've run over. So. It's just the Lions, in the old days when the Lions were on tour, they would if they came to South Africa, they would play against a Northern Transvaal team that had half the Springbok pack. And even back like in the old days, there would be a good Western Province team that they would play that would also have a lot of Springboks. But on this tour, they've played against sides that haven't really been up at the top level of even like franchise rugby, and they've won those games quite easily. And then they go into a test against the Wallabies. They haven't played a really, really tough opposition. And Andy Farrell, I'm not sure if the Lions, I'm pretty sure that way back in 1980, which is one of the first Lions series that I really watched like in its entirety. In 1980, it were about 4 weeks before the first test of it. So the Lions test team would play a good couple of games before they eventually played the first test. Now it's very different. I mean, it's like a couple of games, and I think Andy Farrell's the only time he really tested this team was in that game against the Brumbies, if I remember, about 10 days before the test. It was a midweek game. So they're going to get better. They've played this game. They had a bit of a wake-up call in the last 30 minutes. If I was Andy Farrell, I'd actually be pleased with the way that game went. We got the win, but there were a couple of things that I can talk to the players about, a couple of things that we need to work on. I saw Maro Itoje saying we need some serious conversations, and and I think that's what you need in a camp. And after the first test of a series, what you don't need is them having won, say, by 20 points, and then they go to the next test feeling complacent. They're not going to be complacent. They feel that they've got things to work on, and that's why I expect them to win again on Saturday.
Yeah, Nick, just a final thought from you on Saturday's second test for them.
Yeah, just as I said before, I think the Lions are overwhelming favourites. They've got momentum. They've got a real understanding of their game plan, and they've got physicality in their forwards, good ball carriers. The guys who were under pressure played the best games. You had Curry that selection was criticised. He was outstanding, as was Tate Byrne. So things are looking good from their perspective. And if everything that you've told me is correct, that they were dominated for 50 minutes and could have taken another 30, then things aren't looking good for Australia. So it's a bit of a hallelujah, but I'd love them to win. I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting if they come here after 3-0, for the Springboks. So let's not get ahead of ourselves as well. Guys, thanks for everything.
Brendan, we're not going to briefly touch on the SA under 20 thing, just because.
Please, go for it.
I just think there's an important point to make, that experienced coaches, like we talk about, like, it just felt like to me that the last decade or so, South African rugby have been using the under 20s as a vehicle to breed young coaches, and if I don't think it's a coincidence that 2012 was the last time we won this particular championship, and the coaches in that competition were Dawie Theron, who'd had a couple of seasons of Currie Cup experience coaching behind him, and of course Brendan Venter, who's travelled around the world and has been coaching, and who Nick will tell you is probably coaching when he was a player. But he's that kind of guy. And now, I just felt that this year, with the appointments that they made, and all the sort of narrative around this Junior World Cup, finally SA Rugby was saying, now we've appointed these coaches to coach the team to win the competition. And it made such a huge difference. That looked like such a thoroughly well-coached team, because I didn't watch just the final. Obviously, I watched the other games as well. The final itself isn't one to just watch on its own, because it was humid and the backs were, they weren't quite to the fore as they were in the other game. And I thought both defenses were outstanding. I mean, both teams defended brilliantly. But it was a very well coached team. And I just sort of think, we make a mistake, and I can't remember who it was. And for one of the books I did, one of the Springboks said to me that we make the mistake sometimes of thinking that the under 13 coach isn't your most important coach, but maybe he is, because that's where it's all starting out. And I feel sorry for some very good players that have gone through the age group ranks in this country, but haven't always had the best coaching when they've got to national age group level. And then they get to, that we've seen how good they are once they get to senior level. And I just think that it's critical that SA Rugby have finally, in my view, this is just my view, of course, have got that right. I just think that that finally what Johan Ackerman, Kevin Foot, who hasn't coached at franchise level at the top level, but I mean he has played there. He's been an assistant.
He coached Perth
for a long time.
But he coached professional rugby in Perth. He was assistant there for it, and he's had years. He did Vodacom Cup. He did. I think he did the Varsity Cup, but then went over and extended his career over in Australia. So he has, he's had the benefit of experience. And let's go talk about women's rugby. In fact, that they've got my mate, what's his name? Twice involved there. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. His enthusiasm and his his experience will be invaluable in that, and the sevens is the same. I just have to say that it is a critical post, your coach. Absolutely. If you look at the highs and lows of South African rugby, and you can go through, without getting personal at all, but invariably it is because of inadequacies in the coaching staff that a genuinely good group of Springbok players don't succeed. Rusty taking over took that same group of players 2 years later to win a World Cup. And, that side had taken 50 points twice by New Zealand and 38 points by Ireland. So it was a team that had Dallander, it had Itzebeth, it had Malherbe, it had Kitsoff, it had Pollard, it had all the same guys, but just coached differently. And that does make a massive difference in any team you coach. And the players themselves will say so. So, if going back to what happened to Jake, it was player pressure probably more than anything else. Jake's got the experience. He's won, competitions, World Cups, beat the British Lions with the Brumbies, he won with Montpellier overseas. So he's a successful coach. But if the players are not reacting to him, if he's not getting the best out of the players, then you've got to change the coach. And that's why, it sounds like I'm batting for coaches, but it really does make a difference. You get a good coach there, And if he doesn't succeed, it's usually because the players aren't good enough. You often get really good players, and if the coach is not good enough, then you've got to change him.
Well, it's been the story of South African rugby in the post-isolation era. I wrote a book about the Springbok coaches. You remember I interviewed you, Nick, and people who read it said they loved the book, but it was almost like there was a trend in the book where we would sort of hit a high and then we'd go into a low.
Yes, exactly.
Because of a change of coach or something. And obviously you were, obviously 97. We were talking about the British Lions. Earlier. I mean, the British Lions really struggled to beat South Africa and New Zealand when they go on tour. And they wouldn't have beaten us in 1997 if we'd had the same coach in June or July as we had in November, because the team when you took it over had the same players basically. And you guys flew through. You beat England by a record score. You gave the 50 points to France, and that has been the story of South African rugby. It's been up, but I'm hoping that now we finally got to a point where everything's professional and it's more scientifically based, and we've got the right guys at all the different junctures. I must say, and I hope this doesn't get misinterpreted, but I'm glad that the Springbok coach the position is separated from the directorship, because I don't think that those two things can happen at the same time. And I think that now we're going to stop that sort of, sorry, I'm doing this. We're going to stop those lows following the highs. And we're going to go into a period where South African rugby can be a sustained strength in world rugby, and probably always, if not always number one, always at least in the top two. I really do think that we've got to that point. Do you agree, Nick?
Yes, I do. Absolutely, I agree. And I think the key person is Rassie. I mean, let's not beat about the bush. That guy, getting him as the as our coach in 2017, 2018. I think he took his first year. And the fact that he's still there now at 2025, and they're wanting to extend his contract, is a wonderful thing for South African rugby. It really is. He has managed to transform, to win, and to improve all our teams. So suddenly you're seeing that the sevens team getting better, the women's team's getting better. We're seeing under 21s getting better. The Springboks getting more players in more positions, competitive. To be competitive. So in a very good space, Gavin, I agree with you.
I was going to say, Gav, just two things on the under-20s. One, one of the assistant coaches, they've also brought through some younger coaches. They don't always get the credit, but Lumumba Curry was the Fort Hare coach that took them to the Varsity Shield title. So he's an up-and-coming young coach, and he's obviously also, Kevin Foot's spoken quite a lot about his influence. So they're bringing through younger coaches, which doesn't always come through. But I think an old head like Johan Ackerman there as well, just also instills in those younger players somebody like that too. And he's quite an imposing figure when you meet Johan Ackerman. He's a big guy. I think for those youngsters, it's quite a good thing to have somebody like that with a bit of gravitas in that team as well. And then the other point I just wanted to make to add to you guys is that the introduction of the TRC for under-20s. If you look at the results from this championship, 4 of the top 5 teams were from Sanzar. The 4 Sanzar teams. So it's starting to pay off, just that sort of, because in the past they used to play varsity cup teams and maybe a second string Boerland team or something like that as preparation. There's nothing better than facing New Zealand and Australia and those sort of younger sides as well. So those are the 2 points I just wanted to add to you guys over there. But I'm happy, guys. We've had a great chat, and we went on a bit longer than we expected. But we'll take this on again when the BOKS are back up and running again before the Australia game. Thanks. Enjoy your travels, and Gav, yours as well. I'm sitting here in Gauteng. You guys are in nicer places. We will take it again. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Gav.
Yes.
Cheers, guys.